Here's a life-changing experience for y'all. I was just rereading the stories in the Datura vault, and I decided that my experience would be one that folks would like to read. So, let's go back a ways, to August 22nd, 1998. A date that will live in infamy for me. At that time, I had just finished my first year in college, and had been working with relatives in Mississippi that summer to save money and go out to work as a roofer in New Mexico with a college buddy. My father thought I was wasting my time, dropping out of college to go roam about the country. But I was ready to get out of my home state of Louisiana and take to the road. The road led to Dallas, Texas, where my buddy, we'll call him Lucifer, was staying with another friend. Let's call her E, for a time. The plan was for me to leave Mississippi, go home to Louisiana, and storm out to Dallas, to be free from the clutches of home for the first time of my life. The day I left Louisiana for Texas, I felt a tremendous surge of freedom, almost orgasmic in its implications. I felt like I had been released from a kind of prison, and was ready to hit Dallas and party for a week before heading on to New Mexico with Lucifer. The stage is set. I arrive in the sprawling metropolis and experience the debilitating effects of the worst heatwave in the city in years. Temps were up over 110 with the heat index. It was god-awful hot, y'all. I make my way through the scramble to E's apartment she shared with her mother, a cool hippie type. There, I reunited with my good friends, and we chill and get stoned, catching up on each other's summer adventures up to that point. Eventually, we feel like going out. So, Lucifer goes off to visit a girlfriend, and E and I go to her boyfriend's apartment complex to go swimming in the pool. I put on my shorts, placing my wallet and keys into my luggage, an action I was very glad I did later on, and we went off to take a nice cool dip. We arrive, I meet E's boyfriend for the first time, and we splash around for a while. As it starts to get dark, an impromptu party erupts around the pool. A keg gets brought out, and everyone proceeds to get fucked up, Texas style. The complex seemed to house many college-aged party kids, so there was just partiers coming out of the woodwork. All different kinds of folks, from ghetto gangsters to rave kids to cowboys crowded around having a mellow time. But this benevolent vibe didn't last for very long. A couple of people pull knives, and I hear someone say, "He's got a gun," so everyone scatters. We all run into E's boyfriend's apartment to escape the carnage. Inside, everyone chills out, and soon, the bong's going around, and the beer is flowing again. I check out the motley collection of people around me. I didn't know a soul, but everyone seemed to be fairly cool, and ready to seriously get down. I had no idea that one of the party's attendees was about to unveil something for which there is no words, no explanations, just a magic plant that takes you to the edge of death and pushes you right over. That's right, kiddies. Enter Jimson Weed onto the stage. Now, I was familiar with Jimson Weed, having read Carlos Castaneda's experiences with this plant ally, but I had no idea what awaited me. This guy pulls out a gallon-sized Ziploc baggie, about halfway filled with some kind of seed. This, everyone, is Jimson Weed. It'll make you trip for like 2 days. Usually I charge $40 for a dose, indicating that a handful was a dose. But I'll dose anyone who wants to for free. Good God. When someone starts handing out drugs, I'm usually first in line. But the earlier violence outside, and the fact that I knew no one there, kept me from swallowing the seeds that the dealer handed to me. I decided to wait for my friend Lucifer to return from his girl's house to see if he wanted a trip. A couple of other fellows immediately swallow their handfuls. In retrospect, after reading hundreds of trip reports on this substance, this guy's recommended dose was way too much. I don't even think calling this a heroic dose is doing it justice. I sit and watch to see what the seeds will do to these guys. Then, after about 10 minutes, I'm like, fuck it, and down the seeds with a swig of beer. 5 minutes later, I know I'm fucked. One of the guys starts to stare at the wall, unblinking, unresponsive. His behavior is weird because earlier, he had been very lively, but now, he was catatonic. I mean, this guy was out of it. People started to get worried. When the guy suddenly comes to, leaps up, and dashes out the door. Later on, the guy said that he realized he was in for the trip of his life, so he went to his apartment, locked himself inside, and spent the next 2 days destroying his place and locked into the worst form of insanity. The other guy stood up like the other dude, but started to run into walls as hard as he could. Everyone tried to restrain him, but it was like he was on PCP or something. Ah, shit, I thought. I'm about to become very fucking deranged. It was a horrible feeling. And a few minutes later, I started to get the worst stomach cramps of my life, and my body told me, you've just poisoned yourself badly, and you might not make it. I got very scared and ran into the bathroom where my stomach proceeded to turn itself inside out. I think this action probably saved my life. After I was finished, I had this feeling like I had drunk a couple of cases of beer, and my legs were so wobbly I couldn't hardly walk. Every muscle in my body felt flabby and loose. I returned to the living room, where I felt concern from people. E was repeatedly asking me, "Are you okay?" I tried to tell her I wasn't, but my tongue wouldn't work properly. At around this time, I started to feel like there were insects crawling around under my skin, an extremely uncomfortable sensation. It was so bad that I began to claw at my flesh in order to rip them out. The last thing I remembered was leaping up off the couch and running out the door. Then, blackness. I don't know what happened. It was like being in a dream. Entities swirled around me, and I had the vague sensation of being around people. But my memories of this time are kinda like recalling a hazy dream. Nothing substantial. Finally, I woke up. It was morning, and I was in an apartment, lying on the floor curled up in a fetal position, naked. How I had arrived at this particular point in space and time was a mystery to me. My eyes were dry as a desert, and my contacts were sticking to my eyelids, making everything look really fuzzy. The odd thing was, it was like I had woken up into a dream. But I was aware that the dream was consensus reality, but a dream nonetheless. I felt incredibly happy and full of elation. Suddenly, I was aware of human presences entering the room. Intrigued, I studied them to become aware of their intent. One of the people seemed to be an average middle-aged man, but to my surprise, the other two were wearing uniforms and were armed. Why, it's the police, I thought. But why are they here? What is going on? The police came over to me and started to ask me questions. I couldn't tell if they were real or not, but I jabbered my jaws in a manner resembling speech, and they seemed satisfied with my answers. One of the officers gets a bedsheet from somewhere and wraps it around me, toga style. I thought I had changed into someone from ancient Greece, and couldn't figure out why my hands were being cuffed. Surely, the Greeks need their hands free. I was led out into the bright sunshine when I realized just how thirsty and sensitive to light my eyes were. But I was just having the greatest time getting arrested. It was like I was aware of this happening to me, but I was so far away. I was like, it's a dream, and I'll wake up back in my bed in Louisiana. So I went along with the officers to see where they would take me. Along the way, I tried to make jolly conversation from the back seat, realizing that I'm being arrested. So, tell me, gentlemen, what exactly am I being arrested for? They wouldn't respond. Oh well, I thought, and continued my conversation with the other people in the back seat with me. It was weird. I was talking to this guy in the back seat, and he promptly disappeared. But I really wasn't disturbed by this. The cops continued to ply me with questions like, which day is this? The year? Who's the president? And other such inanities. I answered them all with gusto and personality because I wanted them to like me. In response to their question, so, what drugs do you like to do? I responded, well, I just got really drunk at the kegger last night, officer, and I just don't know what happened after that. Now that I look back on that, I'm glad I instinctively knew not to admit the fact that I was blasted on Jimson weed, thereby saving me 3 days in the psycho ward. We pull into the giant structure located in the heart of Dallas, which is the Dallas County Jail. I was led into the heart of processing, and I was convinced that I was in an airport for some reason, what with all of the hubbub around me. My toga kept falling off, revealing my nakedness to hundreds of people. But I was so far out there, I didn't even notice until cops kept putting my sheet back on. After the volley of fingerprinting and paperwork, I was led into a single cell and given an orange jumpsuit to wear. Man, getting locked into a cell while mad on Jimson weed is something to behold. I immediately realized my situation and got serious in a disassociated sort of way. It was the first time I had ever been in jail, but the emotional impact of this was lost on me, as I was totally oblivious to everything. It was like that feeling you get when you wake up out of a deep sleep. You know, that out of it feeling? It was like that, except about 100 times stronger. I tried to get my faculties in order, but was tripping so hard still, I couldn't do anything but wait. I think I was put in my cell at about 8 in the morning, and stayed in there until about 10 o'clock at night. It was like I turned on my survival mode, and even ate the shitty prison food, because I knew I needed to keep up my strength. As the day wore on, I started to come back to reality, and I started to worry about exactly what I had done to get here. Had I killed somebody? Attacked someone? I had no idea of the serious transgressions that had landed me here, and no one would tell me. Finally, at long last, a jailer came and let me out, handcuffing me to a group of about 10 other people. Okay, people, it's time to go see the judge. Alright, I thought. Now I get to find out what I had done. After arriving in the courtroom, the judge scrolled down the list, and finally, when she got to my name, I feared the worst. The charge? Disorderly conduct. Whew, I thought. Doesn't sound so serious. I was elated in a way. The next thing I know, I'm going through another set of corridors to stand in another line. The friendly jailer keeps us all there, joking about what we were all going to do when we got out. I bet y'all will go get drunk, huh? He grinned, and he looked at me. What in the hell you do? I don't know, but I got seriously wasted last night and got into some shit. Everyone laughed, as oblivious as I was on very powerful drugs, and probably looked like shit. The jailer gives me some street clothes and shoes. I had been wandering around the jail all day shoeless as well, and miraculously, lets us go. I was elated, until I realized I had no money, had no idea where I was, and was still tripping Very fucking hard. In jail, I had been surrounded by a lot of people, and I kept feeling like they were all still around me. I was at a loss of what to do, so I just set out walking. Spirits kept revolving around me, kind of like the way electrons surround an atom. As I walked, my trip seemed to grow in intensity. I recall myself just having great conversation with all of my friends, then just realizing, wait, they aren't here. And then seeing another one of my friends walking beside me and renewing my conversation. I remember seeing Lucifer and running up to him to tell him about my experience so far. Man, you should have kept me from the cops. Like, what the fuck, dude? And he would just smile and then disappear. Eventually, I found myself rapidly walking out of town into some weird area. The kind of place I'd normally be paranoid driving through at night sober. Not to mention on foot, out of my head on Jimson weed. Amazingly, I felt no fear, as the spirits surrounded me revealed themselves to be my guardian angels. They were the spirits of my ancestors, and of people I had never met. I somehow knew they were gonna help me survive this experience and keep me from harm. I decided to walk back into the city, and a new problem manifested itself. As I stated previously, Dallas was in the middle of a heat wave, and I was desperately hot and thirsty. Earlier that summer, I had suffered heat exhaustion, and I felt my body slipping back into that state. My survival instinct kicked in, and I managed to keep myself hydrated by drinking out of water sprinklers and gutters. I knew if I didn't keep myself hydrated, I would die. I imagined that a lot of the thirst was directly caused by the Jimson weed. Man, that stuff just sucks it out of you. I finally reached a point, after walking around the city for several hours, that my body needed rest. So I found a spot under an overpass with a spectacular view of the city. I went to sleep and woke up at dawn. Immediately upon waking, I resumed my walking. My delirium seemed to be increasing as the day progressed and the temperature climbed. It seemed like I just couldn't keep enough fluids in me, and that I was slowly dying. Suddenly, I had a flash of memory. I remembered the name of the street that E's apartment was on. Encouraged by this recall, I asked everyone I ran into until I was pointed in the right direction. "It's about 6 miles that way," said some of the denizens of the city. Great. Another 6 miles in this heat, along the side of one of the main expressways in the city. It was like the Bataan Death March to me. I knew that I was in a struggle for my life, and there was no more water to be found. I knew I was getting very close, but the heat exhaustion claimed me, and I knew my situation was getting critical. I called on my guardian spirits to help me, but they were nowhere to be found. Out of the blue, I hear a cry. "Hey man, come over here, get some water. You don't look so good." I looked to where the voice was coming from, and I spied a city workroom, and a black man was waving me over to their water cooler. At first I thought these were imaginary people like all of the rest, but then I took a swig of water and realized that the spirits had saved me once again. I looked at the man who had called me over, and I realized that his spirit was one of the ones that had accompanied me since I had gotten out of jail. He was like a redeeming angel. I gushed thanks to him, and asked him if I was close to the street I was looking for. "Yeah, it's right over there, about a couple of blocks up." Eureka! I was gonna survive after all. I staggered the rest of the way to the street, and then followed it to the apartment building where E lived. I went to her door and knocked. Lucifer opens the door and totally flips out. We were very glad to see one another, as they all thought I was dead. I don't remember anything except falling out on the floor in a dead faint, aware that I had made it out of the most trying event of my life. The aftermath. It took me about 4 days to get back to normal. I had to use a cane to walk for about a week after, as my body had been smashed like I had been in a motorcycle accident. Evidently, I had fallen repeatedly during my blackout phase. I pieced together what had happened to me with the help of people who had been at the party. It seemed that I had jumped up out of the apartment, took off all of my clothes, and had spent the rest of the evening jumping in and out of the pool, accounting for all of the abrasions and lacerations suffered from banging into concrete repeatedly. What got the cops called was that I started to go to people's apartment, stark naked of course, and saying, "I am the Terminator," then laughing gleefully and running away. So I didn't do anything too bad. The worst thing that came out of this entire ordeal was that E's boyfriend got kicked out of his apartment because of my behavior. Turns out the guy who had been with the cops when I came to was the apartment manager, and that my arrest was enough to get E's boyfriend and roommates kicked out. Pretty weak reasoning, but shit happens, I guess. Surprisingly, the boyfriend and roommates weren't really mad at me, saying, "It could have been any one of us, dude." I was decent and helped them move their shit out. While I did this, I had a lot of these people who lived in the complex make comments like, "Fucked up, weren't you?" and "Nice ass," and shit like that. Hey, I would have laughed at me too. I will never do Jimson weed again, but I am glad for the experience. If any of y'all do it, be out somewhere far away from civilization with plenty of good trip sitters, and prepare to have one foot in the land of the dead and one in the land of the living for about 3 days. This experience changed me as much as my first acid trip did, but this plant will make you realize what death is all about. It was said that Jim Morrison, known for his seemingly superhuman ability to consume substances without any ill effect, was permanently changed by this weed, as was I. Be careful, y'all, and stay away from this stuff, because its trip is a death trip. Love and light. My memories of this event are patchy at best, but through talking to the people involved, I've patched them together in a logical order. I came very close to death, and I do not recommend Datura as a recreational drug. Though having survived the experience, it was terrifying, incredible, and life-changing. I still have trouble dealing with the emotions I experienced when I look back on it. This document is perhaps a therapeutic tool I am using to deal with it once and for all. All names have been changed. Philadelphia, Thanksgiving break, junior year of high school. My best friend, and as of 2008, my wife, Amanda, slept over at my house. We were big potheads at the time, but had never experimented with anything else. We woke up early to go to our friend Jeremiah's house because he grew weed and we wanted to celebrate the break by smoking all day. I drank a beer I stole from my dad on the way there. When we got there, a strange smell filled the house. His parents were away, and he had a pot of strange amber liquid on the stove. Jeremiah was an interesting kid. He appeared to be a run-of-the-mill street thug, but he was very interested in botany. He would see plants in people's yards, and he would know their Latin name and all these facts about them. When we got there, we asked him what the stuff was. He called it Datura loco. I had never heard of it. He said he got the seeds on the internet and planted it, and made a tea from its seeds. He told me it had similar effects to weed, which was quite false. We smoked a blunt, but I was still intrigued. We hung out for a while and decided to go to Amanda's house and watch a movie. Before we left, I asked Jeremiah for some of the Datura tea. He put about 4 shot glasses worth in an empty water bottle, and we left. On the way to Amanda's house, I drank it all. The dose was for both of us, but Amanda didn't want any, so I drank it all. It was the worst tasting thing ever, but I forced myself to drink it all. We arrived at her house and sat down to watch a movie. She put on Herbie Fully Loaded. Luckily, I don't remember any of it. Sometime through the movie, I felt extremely thirsty. Since it was autumn, I poured myself a glass of apple cider. It was difficult to drink. Every time I took a sip, I felt like my throat was closing up. I tried to drink it, but my thirst would not be quenched. We sat a little longer. Then, I began feeling very uncomfortable. I had to pee. I got up and went to the bathroom, and nothing would come out. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, but could not pee. I decided to ignore it and went back to the couch. After the movie, our friend Samantha came to take us to our friend Rob's house to smoke more. By the time she arrived, I was speaking mostly nonsense. I felt like I was talking normally, but neither of them could understand, so it was kind of frustrating. We got in Sam's car. On the ride, I thought I was smoking a cigarette, but I kept dropping it, and then I wouldn't be able to find it. This would continue for the next 3 days. We got to Rob's house, and they all smoked another blunt. They didn't give me any, but I didn't notice. I was still smoking my imaginary cigarettes and speaking gibberish. I went into Rob's bathroom and tried to pee again. In my mind, I still couldn't pee. From what I found out later, I actually peed all over the floor and the walls. I also took all his family's toothbrushes and put them in my pocket. I do not know why. They all went outside to smoke another blunt, and I did too. As they were smoking, I wandered away, and they found me about an hour later in a neighbor's yard talking to a pine tree. I do not remember why. This is where my memory gets better. We left Rob's house and went to a party at my friend John's house. Again, I smoked imaginary cigarettes the whole way there. I had no idea who I was, where I was, or who I was with. And I had given up on communicating because no one could understand me. When we got there, a lot of my friends were there, and John's mom, who I had known since kindergarten. It was his birthday, and there were balloons. And the balloons moved around and seemed to follow me. Their shape shifted between squares, circles, and triangles. I continued to smoke imaginary cigarettes. At first, no one noticed my state because I was keeping quiet. I was standing in the corner because I was afraid of the balloons. John's mom saw me and came over to talk. She asked me about college, and I replied. To me, I gave her a logical answer, but to her, I was still speaking gibberish. She knew I was on something and took me to my parents, who in turn took me to the hospital. This is where it gets messy. On the walk back to my parents' house, each piece of sidewalk I stepped on seemed to shatter away. I was terrified because I didn't want to fall through, but jolts of electricity ran through me when I tried to run. My parents were panicked and rushed me to the hospital because they didn't even know I smoked weed at the time. When I got to the hospital, they took me right away. To me, the doctors and nurses looked like monsters, and I was trying to get out of my chair and run. They had to physically restrain me. I didn't even recognize my parents at this point. When they got a bed for me, they held me down and took off my clothes. I fought them as best as I could, but any fast movement would send a shock of electricity through my body. I punched and kicked the nurses a few times, but was unsuccessful in my attempt to escape. Eventually, They calmed me down. One of the doctors told me he was a wizard and he had a magic potion to cure me. He handed me a cup of black liquid and told me to drink it. It was charcoal to pump my stomach, which was futile because it had been hours since I took it. I gulped the drink and vomited everywhere. Fast forward a little. No memory. Apparently at this point my kidneys were shutting down, so they put a tube in my penis so that I could pee. That was not fun at all. I remember screaming a lot and trying to fight, but I was tied down. Fast forward a little more. I was now in a different room. Chewbacca was next to my bed. I was tied to the bed still, and all sorts of IVs were in me. I kept trying to rip them out, so they put a lot of tape on them. Again, the imaginary cigarette came back. I smoked it for a while, then dropped it in my sheets. I tried to look for it, but instead I found the stick shift from my car. I looked up and I was driving down the street all of a sudden. I drove for a while and then went to hit the brakes, but they were gone. I kicked my feet, but the sheets were covering them. Then I was back in the hospital room. I looked at the small fan in the room, and a strange miniature girl was crouched behind it, staring at me. I was scared of her, and told Chewbacca to take the fan out, and he did. I found out later Chewbacca was my dad. The next thing I knew, I was in Amanda's room smoking a bowl like I had been a few weeks ago. All of the same people were there, and that day replayed itself almost entirely. Then I was back in the hospital bed. This vision of the dorm room and the vision of driving my car kept happening over and over, interspersed with being in the hospital bed next to Chewbacca. The whole time, I kept dropping the imaginary cigarette I was smoking. 3 days later, I woke up in the hospital bed, feeling like I was hit by a train. I still had the pee tube and was hooked up to IVs. I had only a few memories of the past 4 days, but they made no sense to me. As I write this, I realize again how patchy the memory is. My parents were there and explained to me what happened. They called Amanda to find out what I took. They told me my kidneys stopped working for almost 2 days, and just now were working again. And my heart rate jumped from dangerously low to dangerously high over and over. The doctors gave me a 50% chance of survival. I spent the next day in the ICU before they released me. I was extremely weak for the next 5 or 6 days, and they made me go to a drug counselor. Over the next 3 years, I did many drugs heavily and developed some serious problems. Anytime I did acid or shrooms, I would see that small girl behind the fan, and it creeped the hell out of me. 8 months ago, I went to jail and then to rehab, and I have not used drugs since then. Datura was the first step in the long road of drug abuse, and looking back, I wish it had scared me straight. I still wish I remembered more of what happened, but maybe it's best I don't. Datura the Temptress. For 4 months, I searched obsessively for Datura stramonium, Jimson weed. I had looked at hundreds of pictures and read many articles on the elusive plant, but it wasn't until one day, when I was coming home from work, that it caught my eye. Something had been drawing my attention to a motel's jacuzzi each day as I passed by, but I had no idea what it was. One day, I figured out that I don't usually notice something so intensely, so I decided to look a little closer. Boy, was I a happy camper. There she was, a huge juniper bush, mounted like a shrine in front of a mound with at least 15 datura plants. At the top stood the mother, like a beautiful woman. It really freaked me out. The plant had such a powerful presence. I had to go back. So I planned to go that night on my bicycle and hop the fence to grab a portion of the treasure. This was probably a bad thing to do, crossing the fence to steal the datura plants. But she found me and presented me with this temptation. Months passed, and the seeds just sat in my desk until one day when I met this kid traveling through town. We spent the night talking, and I just couldn't resist bringing up the subject of the datura. He said he had heard of it and had wanted to take it for a long time. His eagerness to test the plant made him seem a bit naive, but he insisted that he was ready. "Come on, dude, let's do it. It'll turn out good and we will learn a lot." We went to the kitchen and ground 3/4 tablespoons of the seeds into the family coffee grinder for each of us. Then, we packed it into our knapsacks for the camping trip, which was planned for that night. We arrived at dusk and settled down, lit a fire, prayed, and downed the poisonings seeds without telling our friends. Stefan, the traveling kid, and I took a walk down the dirt road that ran through the center of the field. We were extremely attentive to how the seeds were affecting us. I listened closely. What would happen next? Her presence began to be felt about 100 yards down the road. We sat in the middle of the road and felt the world slipping from our control. Ego. We gazed at the distant fire. The world became so eerie. The voices and lives of our friends seemed another world away. I asked Stefan how it was coming. He said, "I'm taking a crap." I guess I followed him. We were in this together and didn't want to leave him. And sat with him for a few minutes and didn't even realize it. I was becoming a little delirious. We walked back to the campsite and sat down on a log. Our mouths became so dry. We chugged at least 2 quarts of water each. No resolve. We both lay down in concern. "Are you all right?" he whispered to me. We were both moaning and felt very scared, lonely, and regretful. My brother left and went home. I wanted to leave with him so badly, but this was my choice, and I said not a word and examined my life. I didn't want to die. I stumbled off to a ditch near the pasture so I could lie down. The world I once knew was disappearing. The stars multiplied. I felt like I was dying. I had to piss, so I tried to get up. My legs felt gel-like. I stumbled on some rocks and fell back down and began crying. I then pulled myself back up to the campsite, 20 yards away, where the car was parked. I tried to crawl, but it was too difficult also. I flopped this body against the car and tried to pee, but I couldn't. I was in pain. I got back to my ditch and lay there and tried to pee lying down. I gave up. An old Bob Dylan tune echoed into the night sky from the car stereo. The song was very comforting. One too many mornings. I was startled when I noticed car lights reflecting on the streets around the pasture. I moved myself quickly to the car to turn off the music and uttered in fear that a car was coming. The guys were expecting some folks, so I laid down next to the fire. At this point, the delirium really set in, and my friends knew something now. It's so creepy remembering this. I was told that for the next couple of hours, they watched me trying to grasp the physical world from the delusional. I was like a little kid, a caveman or something. I was trying to talk, but it all came out so jumbled in some other language. The guys became a little concerned. They told me that I kept walking off this wooden deck-like thing into a soggy creek bed. They found me there mangled and pulled me out with concern. I kept wandering back to the creek bed, stumbling off the deck into it. Around 4 a.m. they pulled me out and stood me up, and I kept peeing on myself. It was so relieving. I suppose everyone went to bed or something because I wandered off to the dirt road, the one that goes through the pasture. I felt energized and had control of my body now, still delirious. I had found Stefan. He sat me down and began to inform me of something very unnerving. The night had a very evil feeling, as it was. He said, "Man, I don't know what to do. I don't want this." He showed me his dark, long fingernails. His face was very old and hairy, werewolf-like. I flipped out. I told him it was going to be okay and not to worry. It was just a bad dream. I knew this wasn't him, though I saw him. He was being possessed by her. I ran for my life. I had begun to witness the spirit world, the darkest reality. Ghost-like beings were everywhere. It sickened me. I ran and ran, hopped a barbed wire fence into a weedy field, and ran around the perimeter, trying to avoid stepping on snakes. I was almost flying. I fell really hard at one point. When I got up, I saw a glow in the middle of the field. I was controlled at this point. I was pulled to the center of the field where I witnessed some demonic action. There were 7 guys and girls dressed in dark clothes, black hair and pale skin. They were all enticed, basically making love with the plant. They danced around the glowing Datura plant. She was alive. There was one guy/girl to my left that was very tall and thin. She seemed to be the plant spirit, the leader. They all quit dancing. Datura, she stared into my eyes and shook her head. I messed up, and I knew it. I ran so quick towards the woods. She sent one of the others, enticed ones, after me. I tried to hop this barbed fence, but I was caught and cut myself. I turned around and the enticed one, he stopped still in the darkness. I felt as if he wanted to run with me and get away from this evil life. I said, "Come on, dude, let's go. She'll kill you, come on." He stopped. It was as if something forced him to shake his head, saying, "No, no." I hopped a wire and ran up the hill, tore through vines, briar, just tearing through. I leapt down the other side. Something stopped me and pulled my head up towards the ridge. There was the Temptress, and she was after my life. She was capable of transformation and teleportation. I was so scared. I tore through the woods. I had to avoid 2 black jaguars. It was her. She is so tricky and evil. I came to the highway, and it was about dawn at this point. I kept running from her. She was so tricky, she had this power to dissipate, bow into the side of the road and just vanish, leaving only slightly noticeable energy particles. She could move about so quickly like this. I spent the next hour running in terror. I had to prove my strength and that I wasn't gonna give in. She would offer me things like power and drugs, girls, etc. She sat on top of a road sign with his legs crossed behind. What does this say? She tested my strength to the end. So wicked. I remember running. Cars were swerving in order to avoid me. I guess I was in the road. I didn't dare go into the woods. They had too much power in the darker areas. I could feel their evil laughter in the distance. He would bow into the ground every time a car would come around the corner. I was so scared and tired. I didn't know where I was, but I had to get out of there quickly. I tried signaling to the traffic that they were trying to get me. A lady pulled over and told me to get in. She knew something was wrong. I was too confused. She said she took me to a sheriff's station in another town. It turned out she was a psychologist. She spotted the terror. Most folks don't pick up crazed people. I was extremely blessed. I went to the station. She told the sheriff that I was confused and seemed very disturbed. I told the cop that I was being followed by evil kids that wanted to sacrifice me. He asked me if I had done any drugs. I said no, because it was real. I had forgotten about the Datura and only remembered the cannabis leaf I smoked the day before. Besides, he wouldn't have believed me if I told him that I did. But he knew. They called my mother and brother. They came and got me. The plant left me with strange powers that I was soon to lose as I came down. By the way, I was informed that the cops went to check out that area. They actually looked into the cult members in the physical world. It was very kind of them. The plant is a very useful teacher, but also deadly. I don't know that it is worth the risk. I was so dehydrated, my tonsils were bleeding. A cop came in and poured me a styrofoam cup of water. My, it was the best. I savored every drop. I dropped the cup of water on the floor. When I looked down, it was gone. There are many delusional things that happen also. It may be hard to distinguish the true lessons from the effect of poison. I got home, drank some water, and took a long rest. It left me very lonely for months. My eyes were unable to focus for the following week. I went to my friend's house the next day. I had to find out what happened. Before describing anything on my part, he told me what he witnessed at the campsite. He was sober. He said he witnessed Stefan, the other induced one, become real old looking. He was hairy like a dog, and it was clear, he said. He described exactly what happened to him and what I witnessed. The following week I went to the library to research more about Datura. A book read that it is common to have dreams involving lycanthropy, turning of man to wolf. How bizarre. This freaked me out. Please, don't take this with a grain of salt or as an entertaining story. It was such a nightmare. I felt so lonely for so long, still recovering a year later. I must inform people of the deadliness of the Datura. She will trick you into death. And if you die, you may have more problems than just a dead body. She will have weakened you to the point of surrendering your soul to her. Watch out, and please take much precaution, brothers, sisters. I am in my mid-30s and have tried many different things in my time. LSD, mescaline, mushrooms, etc. I would call myself experienced with hallucinogenic, which were always fun for me, especially when I was younger. This experience was not one of those times. I must mention that I was trying to make a very light dose, just to see what the effects would be. I did not intend to become incapacitated. Although I tried to document my experience exactly, I soon realized this was an impossibility. Here is what I do know. 11 a.m. I boiled exactly 10 leaves, about 6 to 8 inches long, in 8 cups of water for 10 minutes. This was the first time with this plant, and I didn't want to overdo it. I took it off the burner and let it steep for a few minutes. As that was cooling, I made a pitcher of really sweet tea from a concentrated dry tea mix. Then I filled a 20-ounce glass with ice and filled the cup halfway with tea. I then filled the rest of the glass with the leaf brew. I ended up using only about 6 to 8 ounces of the brew. 11:30 a.m. I drank the tea all at once. It tasted quite nasty, even though it was heavily sweetened. It only took me a few minutes. I then removed the leaves from the pot, threw them away, and the pot with the remaining brew back on the stove. 11:45 a.m. I started to wonder if I had enough, and thought it a good idea to make another glass. So I did, exactly as before, and drank it quickly as well. This time, I noticed it was a little hard to get down though, almost like my throat was closing up, making me feel like I was choking. I started to walk back to the couch and realized I felt funny, like my body was drunk, but my mind perfectly coherent. From this point on, I cannot tell you the exact timing of anything else, because although I didn't realize it yet, I lost track of all time and reality. 12-ish, maybe. Ah, shit. I am totally wasted. I am sitting on the couch and notice things are really strange. Corners of the walls turning into spider webs. Very blurry vision. I was watching TV, but realized I can't really see it anymore, or understand what they're saying. I forgot to mention I was alone, for now. My wife and daughter were due back late that afternoon. More on that later. I never intended to be this messed up, so I decided to get up off the couch and go to the bathroom. I realized then that it would take every effort, almost Herculean strength, just to get off the couch. Finally, I got up off the couch and stumbled to the bathroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Oh my God. The first thing I noticed was that my eyes were completely dilated. Then I looked down at my hands. I had a hard time focusing, but when I finally did, I realized they were beet red. I mean red. Worse than the worst sunburn you have ever seen. I looked back up at my face in the mirror, and I finally came into focus again. I realized my face looked the same. Now, I am freaking. My whole body was red, from head to toe. I need to mention at this point that I still felt like I was still there mentally. All I noticed were these physical problems. Completely dilated pupils, inability to focus, beet red skin. I decided that I had better try to puke up whatever I could, so I tried. Only a little came up. More like an acid reflux type thing. Except now, I have a bigger problem. My throat is closing up. Breathing was difficult, and I had a dry mouth like never before. No amount of water would satisfy. And every time I tried to drink, it felt like I was going to choke. I must mention that although I thought at the time my mind was still rational, I realized later that I was far from rational. Even still, I calmly, even though I felt I was dying, went to my computer to look up websites to try to find out if there was a way to reverse the effects I was having. Somehow I made it to a site, I think, but then realized I couldn't read it. Every word on the page was gibberish. It didn't make any sense. I knew the answer was somewhere, but I couldn't find it. Looking back, I estimate I spent hours on the computer, staring blindly at the screen. At the time, I thought it was minutes. I went outside to smoke a cig and realized I couldn't see anything outside. It was way too bright, so I came back in quickly. I then thought of how fucked up I was, and that I need to warn my daughter of the danger of this drug. She's 12. I went into her room and started to lecture her about the dangers of drugs and to never try it and pick good friends and so on. I remember thinking how good she is being. She sat quietly and listened to me intently. When I thought I made my point, I got up to leave and realized she left the room. I was pissed. How could she just walk away like that? I went out to the living room to complain and realized she wasn't there. Nobody was there. I was still alone. I remember feeling at that point like I am in trouble. What have I been doing? I must note that I still had all the symptoms I had earlier. The most troubling being I stumbled everywhere I went. My body was still beet red, and I choked every time I tried to drink something. I wondered how long it had been. I don't remember exactly what time it was when I looked out, but I did realize it was a lot longer than I thought. I recall thinking my family would be home soon. I realized later I lost several hours doing what I don't know. Then they came home. Suddenly there she was, my wife. And boy did she look pissed. After what happened earlier though, I didn't believe it was actually her. This part of the story is now her recollection of what she came home to. She is a paramedic, by the way, too. She said she came home, opened the front door, and smoke came pouring out of the house. She ran to notice that the stove was on fire, that I was just standing there, looking off into space. She was screaming at me, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I remember saying nothing is wrong, but she says I was mumbling something about she needed to get off my back and go to bed. Then I saw my daughter run by and thought, what was wrong with her? I didn't realize then, but she was scared shitless about what was going on. Then they left. Or had they even been there? I wondered. Oh, think I'll go have a smoke. Then what seemed like a few minutes, actually hours, they came back. We have pets, by the way, too. 3 dogs and a cat. When they came home the second time, all the animals were gone and the door was wide open. Now, she's really pissed. She screams to me about almost burning the house down, and now all the pets are gone. I told her she was nuts and to get off my back. Then, they both left again. Damn, I thought. Were they even there? I spent the rest of the night on the computer, mostly just staring at the monitor. I woke up the next morning on the couch and had a talk with my wife. I still felt funny, but the worst was over. So, this is what really happened. My wife and daughter came home about 5:30 p.m. to find the stove on fire. She put out the fire. I must have taken the leaves out of the garbage and tried to make some tea. The stove was scorched. I think I drank more tea, but can't be certain. She drilled me about what was going on. She said I wouldn't tell her, and kept telling her everything is cool. She asked me repeatedly what I was on, but I wouldn't tell her. She didn't realize I was as bad off as I was. She was madder than anything. So she and my daughter took off and came back at about 8:30 p.m. She found me on the computer and screamed this time, saying I lost the pets. I could go on and on with more details, but I don't want to miss the point. I could have burned to death in this house. I could have choked to death. Heart attack. Heart was racing too. I could have easily died. Those things didn't happen, but I will tell you what did. It has been 2 months since this happened, and I'm still not the same. I hate to say it's permanent. I hope not. But truth is, I screwed myself up. My throat is partially closed. I have trouble breathing when I sleep. I cough up liquid sometimes because it tries to go down my windpipe. I still see shit that is not there. But worst of all is my brain. I can't maintain my thoughts. I am a writer, but I can't focus anymore. It took me forever to write this.